Thank you, Mel. Hello, everybody. I don't have like the typical Steve Irwin Australian accent, but I can give it a go at parts of the presentation. It's wonderful to be here in Kuala Lumpur. I come from Melbourne, as Mel mentioned, famous for its laneways, its coffee, and its designers in black clothes. So I thought I'd wear my most vibrant outfit that I have here for you today. The session's also being recorded, so I do need some help from all of you as well. So I just want to get some laugh tracks, some clapping tracks as well. There we go, there's the laughing. Now the clapping. Yeah. Excellent. And like an like I said something really impressive. No, you can do better than that, come on. There we go. That's obviously a lie. I just wanted to get some energy into the room. I'm going to talk to you today a little bit about design as clarity. Design is often sort of seen as that final layer, a little bit of colouring in at the end of a presentation. But in a world that's accelerating, technology is going crazy, and complexity is everywhere, the need for clarity in business has never been greater. And I think that the role that design must play has never been clearer. And so throughout this presentation, we'll explore together what it means to create clarity, and we'll ask, what if design is not simply a process to follow, but how we make sense of the world? We'll discuss what it takes to build clarity into ways of working and how design creates not just better outcomes, but better teams and cultures. Before that, though, I want to begin here in 1719. So this map was created 306 years ago. It was produced by a gentleman called Herman Moll, a Dutch geographer living in London, and its cartouche, which is the little sign at the top, it reads, "A new and correct map of the world, shewing ye situation of its principal parts, according to the newest and most exact observations." This map was built from other maps. He didn't actually visit any of these places, and he constructed this from the perspectives and the views of other people. As we read this map, I invite you to notice a few details. First, the coloured borders of political entities. Areas are marked and mapped with distinct colours, and each state is tinted so that the reader can immediately separate nations like Britain, France, and the Holy Roman Empire. Next, we also see open acknowledgement of parts unknown. Areas of Africa, Asia, and the Arctic are left completely uncoloured or drawn. From the mapmaker's perspective, unknown required less detail and perhaps even highlights some of their own priorities. Regions of trade significance that are crucial to commerce, like the Caribbean, are drawn with unusual care, often in bolder tones and including wind and sea charts. If we move down to the Straits of Malacca, the map explodes with colour and detail. We can see Sumatra, Borneo, Siam, Cochin China, and countless islands and passages are named. We see wind charts, ocean currents, and rocky areas mapped with incredible precision. The strait is the artery of global trade in the area. Spices, textiles, and goods flowing between Europe and Asia. The precision in map detail also foreshadows what followed: British influence and the control of vital trade routes. What might be becoming apparent is this was not a neutral record of geography, like a modern map that we would all use. We would expect it to be politically and culturally correct. This map was a statement of ambition. What I love about this kind of map, and many like it, is that intent, that ambition. It's not there to give sailing directions or a street address. It's there to tell a story for people who might never go to sea: kings, lords, courtiers. It brings distant places to life and makes them strategically meaningful. The map overflows with adventure, and each time your eyes land, you'll notice something new. Australia is incomplete and joins New Guinea. New Zealand is absent, and trade winds are mapped where it matters. It's part measurement, part imagination, and part story. Here's another map in 1804 describing London's poverty. It's an early example of social cartography, where each street is coloured to indicate the inhabitants' income and social class. Beyond explaining where poverty is, perhaps it also warns of bad neighbourhoods like those marked in black, or it tells businesses where to invest on the streets marked in deep orange. The map's purpose is to tell a story and to give meaning and to implore action, and in some ways it's more a graph than it is a map. And maps were never just tools, they were also art, part imagination, part narrative, blending observation, symbol, and story. They carried ideas like this map of Genesis into geography and then into Revelation. Before maps were standardized and used how we use them today, orientation was a craft. Explorers read the sky. To orient means to find east, hence orient in the east. You would look where the sun rises and turn your body and map and sailing all the way to that direction. That's how you would find where you are and know where to go next. We would track seasons and rivers over time to know where we are and where we need to go. And we'd understand the oceans and the tides. A map wasn't a guarantee, it was quite simply a way to begin. No voyage had certainty, and clarity was discovered along the way, noticing, adjusting, and learning. Over time, maps shifted in their purpose. They were no longer made for explorers at sea, but for merchants, insurers, and empires that wanted trade to run smoothly and predictably. These maps weren't about wonder or discovery, they were about efficiency, risk reduction, and control. To serve those interests, standards were created. We decided that north should always be at the top, scales became uniform, and labels followed predictable patterns. This made maps much easier to use across continents, but it also flattened the world. The act of orienting, interpreting, and adjusting to environment gave way to following standards that anyone could replicate. This shift meant maps became commodities. They could be mass-produced, distributed, and sold like any product. And maps turned from living artifact of exploration into instruments of commerce and empire. Useful for coordination, yes, but less open to ambiguity, imagination, or interpretation. What was lost in that craft was orientation, being able to place yourself, know where you are, and where you need to go next. It required balancing certainty and uncertainty, clarity and ambiguity through standards that somebody else had determined for you. When orientation is reduced to these conventions, we stop the skill of making sense and we start trusting the surface rather than interrogating it. We follow a path that's already marked instead of asking ourselves if that path is correct to begin with. Maps, over time, began to tell us what to do instead of supporting us into making decisions for ourselves. And that's the same tension we live with today. Open Google Maps or any map technology, and you'll see the triumph of standardization. Every street is rendered, every icon is familiar, and every interaction is predictable and expected. It enables coordination, but it narrows what we see. It privileges the fastest route, the most popular places, and the destinations that fit within the model. Tools and frameworks in design and technology work exactly the same way. They move faster together, but they risk dulling our ability to notice, to question, and to explore what sits just outside the template. And so let's now turn to design, and we're going to continue back in the 1700s, 1708, and we're going to talk about this guy. This is Isaac Newton, but you might know him as Apple and Gravity Guy. That's his formal title. He pursued the idea that the world is governed by universal laws of science and that humans are precise, discoverable, and predictable. From his perspective, humans are not outside of any measure of law or physics. We are part of the same lawful creation. He believed that if nature can be expressed in equations, then in principle so can we. Measure carefully enough, model well enough, and humans can be measured, explained, and predicted. The counterweight to this was Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, a poet and scientist who pushed back on that reductionist thinking. In his work on colour and in nature, he argued that experience is lived first and measured second. Context and perception change what things mean. Goethe pulls us toward meanings, feelings, and experiences. Not everything matters shows up in a metric, and not every metric matters. The human world is interpreted before it's calculated, and people decide with stories and emotions just like they do with data and statistics. These two figures give us the poles of design, art versus science. Newton on one side, confidence in measurement, and Goethe representing confidence in experience. And I think design lives in the tension between the two of these. By the 19th century, the desire to measure humans reached new heights. Adolphe Quetelet, a Belgian statistician, believed that human traits follow statistical laws and can be described by probability distributions, just like you could work out the direction of the moon and where it will be in a month's time. He introduced this idea of the average man, the belief that if you measure enough people, you'll find a statistical center point, and that center wasn't just normal, it was ideal. Everything else, like differences or diversity, should be treated as deviation. Quetelet charted propensity for crime by age and gender, convinced that behavior could be graphed like physics. For him, society could be predicted and controlled if only we collected enough data. He argued the same bell curve describes our moral qualities and called it a moral curve. Character and virtue, he believed, cluster just like age and height as averages. Here, he made the average the ideal, and description started to become prescription. And you may think that this one person from hundreds of years ago surely couldn't have that much influence on your world today, but we're going to do a very brief experiment. Raise your hand if you've ever calculated your BMI, your body mass index. I think that's almost everyone. So congratulations, you've been influenced by Quetelet. 195 years ago, in 1830, he developed the BMI, or the Quetelet index, and 200 years later, it's still core to our belief on weight and health, and completely and totally scientifically flawed. Yes. And his idea that we could design for this average made its way into all parts of the physical world. Chairs, doors, streets, and all sorts of everyday things were built on the concept of average. By the 1960s and 70s, these big counter movements started to come and emerge. Co-design entered the room. And it challenged the concept of average by bringing people into the process as participants and partners. Co-design introduced three important things. It closed distance and we stopped guessing. It shrank blind spots so edge cases became first class. And it raised the relevance of design because those who carry the consequences help to design the solution. But as co-design opened the doors as a discipline and created new ways of seeing and thinking about the world, business discovered another way that they could use it, packaging it and selling it. Human-centered design and design thinking translated design into steps, stages, and toolkits that anyone could pick up. I'm sure many of you have been told everyone's a designer. This was both a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it gave much greater access to design and a shared language, and a curse because it made design look like a recipe, a repeatable science rather than a situational craft. The boom in boot camps, short courses created a generation fluent in rituals, but not necessarily in practice. We became experts at methods, but not outcomes. We were working, but we're not quite sure why. Sticky notes, diamonds, and canvases became signals of design, often without any real reason behind it. And in many organizations, that was enough. The appearance of design was simply enough for us to keep moving. So, co-design refreshingly taught us to design for the edges and not the average, but in this push to grow and scale, literally everything, we optimized for throughput and predictability, and we did exactly the same thing for design. In that optimization, we started to look at averages because they feel safe, and so we drifted back to deduction. And this matters because when we reduce design or our work or our craft into a recipe, we fall back to averages and we lose the ability to create clarity where it matters most. And ultimately, we become just like Quetelet, trying hard to find that bell curve. In The Design of Business by Roger Martin, a really great book, I recommend all of you read it, he explains that most organizations gravitate towards algorithms, predictable, repeatable processes. And we know that businesses do that because most of the people that get promoted or rewarded are the most predictable. Maybe not the most correct, maybe not the most skilled, but the most predictable. Martin's knowledge funnel, seen here, explains why. Ideas move from mystery to heuristic to algorithm. Mystery is the starting point, a complex, ambiguous challenge, and problems here are ill-defined, messy, and not yet truly understood. Through exploration and design, patterns start to emerge. Heuristics are rules of thumb or guiding principles to help reduce uncertainty, personas, design principles, etc. And over time, those heuristics are refined and refined and refined, and eventually they become algorithms, repeatable, scalable, and efficient. And we don't stop to think about why we're using them, we just do because that's what the organization has always done. And we see that play out in business as a desire for certainty. This desire for algorithms is also a desire for certainty. And in general, certainty is sought through data, and that creates an impulse to measure quite literally everything. We're going to do another poll. Put your hand up if in the last month you've been asked to review or rate a product or service. Again, almost everyone. The bias towards data and algorithms explains why design has been reduced to process toolkits and double diamond boot camps. Just as businesses chase predictability, design too often gets packaged as methods rather than craft. Standardizing design through easily accessible frameworks and toolkits definitely gave us confidence, but it also began to strip away the very thing that made it powerful in the first place, the ability to navigate the unknown. I believe design is a form of critical thinking. It's how we shape decisions in the face of uncertainty. Yet businesses treat design as a pipeline of outputs or a way to de-risk projects, skipping the hard parts of deep research, systems thinking, or iterative refinement. In many ways, design is just insurance. This packaging of design thinking is an easy formula will and has devalued design, which is why we waste so much time having conversations about a seat at the table or design's influence in business. A complete waste of time and unnecessary. And so we come to the key question for my thesis today, which is, if design isn't a recipe or process, what then is the point of design? The point of design is to create clarity just like maps do. Design orients us, it draws borders, it marks wins, and it leaves space for the unknown. And in doing so, it makes distant ambitions possible and the world just clear enough for us to act. By contrast, when we anchor an opportunity too heavily in data, we forget that data is historical, it can describe, but it cannot imagine. In today's world of acceleration and complexity, that becomes a challenge because reducing problems to the algorithm stage misses the power of design completely, navigating mysteries and heuristics where clarity must be created rather than inherited through algorithm. Design-driven clarity takes a different approach. Rather than trying to eliminate ambiguity by slicing it into metrics, designers embrace the ambiguity and make sense of it through human insight. We'll navigate the complexity not by removing the ambiguity, but by orienting with it, finding our direction within it to ask better questions and to read context for meaning. Design enables us to pair exploration with rigor to create clarity when certainty isn't available. No expedition or journey had any guarantee, and clarity came from learning along the way. Therefore, design is the map. Design's role is not certainty, but clarity. Design is not a process, but orientation. By creating clarity, we orient ourselves, allowing us to frame and reframe and then to act. To adopt this perspective of design clarity, we must go back to first principles and truly accept that design is messy because the world is messy. There's a famous design squiggle by Damien Newman, and I think it illustrates this perfectly. Unlike tidy stage gate models or steps, the squiggle shows that design work typically starts in chaos, exploring, questioning, and iterating, and that only later converges to a single line of solution. I also invite you to notice that the lines overlapping and clashing together, much like collaboration, much like a design workshop, much like working with other people. And I think that that's one of the best parts of design. Embracing this squiggly path is quite crucial, and personally what I love about everything that I'm able to do in innovation is working in a space like this. From here, I like to think about design as less a process to follow, nor a framework, but a rhythm. It's 3 moves that repeat into each other and go back and forth of orient, frame, and act. So I invite you for the remainder of this presentation, and ideally the rest of your life, to think about your world as though you're a modern map maker. When I talk about orientation, I don't mean the phase at the beginning of the project or a step that you tick off before the real work begins. Orientation is a discipline. It's the habit of continually pausing and noticing and asking yourself, what are we doing before you rush into a solution? In navigation, orienting meant looking at the sky, watching the tides, and paying attention to the signs of the environment before setting course. In design, it's much the same. Orientation is how we begin to make sense of the mess, how we acknowledge uncertainty without panicking, and how we start to create a path with confidence. Too often in organizations, this part is just completely skipped. Teams feel pressured to move quickly, so they jump straight into solutions and outputs. The problem is that without orientation, we risk being beautifully wrong. We produce polished work that looks fantastic, meets our design system and all of our algorithms and heuristics, but solves no real problem. It's what ensures the work we do is anchored in meaning rather than assumption. And to bring it to life, I want to share 9 quick principles of creating clarity through design by orient, frame, and act. We often hear fall in love with the problem, not the solution. The challenge is that problems are usually framed too narrowly, too tactically, or from a single perspective. Orientation asks us to lift our gaze and to fall in love with the ambition, the higher aspiration behind the work. For instance, if you're designing an insurance claims app, the ambition isn't make claims faster, it's restore trust when people are most vulnerable. When we love the ambition, we make better choices in the detail because we're constantly orienting back to the higher purpose. Journey maps are helpful, but they're only slices of a bigger picture. Orientation requires us to see the systems that shape behaviour. Policies, incentives, structures, and very painful stakeholders all make a big difference. If we only fix on a touch point, the system will snap back to its original position and no change will have been enacted. For example, smooth sailing at an airport or a check-in process won't last if the underlying regulations or staffing models remain unchanged. Systems thinking widens the map, and only by widening can we design for a greater impact. Orientation isn't only descriptive, it's imaginative. It asks, what if? It invites us to imagine futures that might feel unrealistic now, but serve for reference points in change. And it doesn't matter if we get there or not, we're going to something bigger. In education, for example, it's not enough for us to map the student journey as it exists. We must imagine new ways of learning, new roles for teachers, or new forms of community support. Bold worlds expand our sense of direction, even if we never fully reach them. Framing is where orientation becomes direction. If orienting is about noticing patterns, tensions, and possibilities, then framing is the moment we choose what matters and decide how we'll talk about it. Framing is not a slogan or a neat headline. It's a document, a piece of paper, and it's a disciplined act of defining the problem so that useful action becomes possible. A good frame explains why the problem is worth solving now, what forces shape it, and what would constitute meaningful progress. It gives sponsors something to champion, teams something to rally around, and critics something concrete to challenge. Think about it as a good joke or an insight. It's clear, it's punchy, and everyone understands it. Most organizations that assume problems are obvious. Targets, OKRs, and backlog items tend to hint at a problem, but they never really name it out loud. Champions of framing bring that hidden frame to the surface and take responsibility for its quality. They'll grab a whiteboard marker and they'll write it down on the whiteboard for people to agree or disagree with. Importantly, they make it explicit what's outside of the frame so that teams aren't carrying everything and you can leave some anxiety at the door. You don't have to worry about things that aren't in this frame because they're not in the frame on purpose. A frame becomes a living object. It should be easy to see, easy to challenge, and easy to update as evidence arrives. You make the frame the first page of the working document, the cover of the backlog, the header of the roadmap, and you put it everywhere in your prototype. You talk about it in the hallways, the elevators, and depending on how close you are to your colleagues, maybe even in the bathroom. Frames fail when they read like design slogans or marketing words to business leaders or like cost center directives to designers. Bridging design and language means writing the frame in two languages at once, the language of human outcomes and the language of business outcomes. For example, restore trust during claims must be paired with a specific operational shift, such as reduce avoidable rework and escalations in the first 5 days of a claim. The human outcome anchors meaning, while the operating outcome allows resources and spend. When design and businesses see their concerns reflected in the same paragraph, sponsorship strengthens and trade-offs become negotiable rather than opposition. A frame should not shrink ambition to fit the current backlog, and it should unlock better ambition by changing the question. Instead of how do we speed up claims, a stronger frame might be how do we reduce cognitive burden on customers in the first 48 hours after a loss. This change widens the solution space beyond workflow speed to include language, emotional load, channel voice, and proactive support. And unlocking ambition doesn't mean promising a moonshot or something that's unachievable. It means choosing wording that points the team to something higher than they might have thought that they would be able to achieve. And it also energizes stakeholders because it makes things plausible. We might actually move a needle rather than move things around on a screen. So framing becomes the designer's method of choice. It's how we decide what matters, how we tell the story of a problem, and how we give direction to ambition. Act is where clarity becomes momentum. It's not the moment that we declare victory and lock ourselves into a plan and everybody goes 2-week sprints over 3 months. It's the disciplined practice of making the smallest possible move, learning from the real world, and adjusting as the frame gives us more evidence. In most organizations, action is confused with activity. You'll see huge backlogs, crowded roadmaps, and carefully designed releases every quarter, yet very little changes in how customers behave or how the system performs. We're no more competitive than we were 3 months ago, and neither really are our competitors. Acting in a design sense is different. It treats every step as a hypothesis, sets explicit decision rules in advance, and treats everything as reversible. The first principle for ACT is bias to action. And a bias to action isn't code word for rush. It's a commitment to put something in front of the right people sooner than normally feels comfortable. Don't wait, just go. The discipline is to define the smallest amount of change necessary to move. Before you start to design an opportunity, I encourage you to capture 3 things on a page: the hypothesis, the audience you need to learn from, and the decision tree for whatever the result you get. Often when we run a hypothesis test, we'll get results and we try to renegotiate what those results mean or try to reframe them. If you write down what you'll do with the result beforehand, it will help you to make sure that you're staying true to your frame. A proof of concept demonstrates that something can work under controlled conditions, but a proof of change demonstrates that people actually work differently or believe and live differently because of it. To reach that bar, we need to measure substitution, not just usage. And the clearest proof is when people stop doing the old thing and do the new thing because they want to, not because they're told to. Most organizations celebrate milestones, feature releases, MVPs, project launches, but momentum matters more. In practice, I think it means stepping away from agile, and it is to weekly releases. It's demos that include operations and policy, not just design. It means communicating in deltas, such as we removed 2 field validations, or we saved 5 hours of an application form. Those are the kinds of things that your stakeholders want to hear, and the kind of momentum that will keep you going for longer and longer. Momentum reduces organizational anxiety because we see progress happening in front of us in real time, and regular changes feel like maintenance rather than emergencies. Empowered by these 9 principles, we can begin to know if a team or project has reached clarity, and we look for these signals. 1, a unified understanding. Everyone articulates the problem or solution in a similar way, and there's a shared language or metaphor. 2, focused priorities and scope. Clarity means you've decided what not to do. Teams stop chasing every idea and zero in on what really matters. Decisive momentum. Decisions get made more quickly and they stick. Teams avoid analysis paralysis and move forward with confidence and in the same direction. And tangible outcomes tied to vision. Outputs are clearly linked to the core insight and problem definition, and everyone knows why they're working on what they're working on and how what they're working on contributes. Confidence and cohesion. Clarity breeds confidence, morale improves, debates become constructive, and new starters ramp up really quickly. In essence, achieving clarity looks like coherence. This project feels like an integrated whole rather than disjointed parts. Stakeholders stop questioning the why and focus on the how. And perhaps the ultimate sign of clarity is when someone says, yeah, that makes sense. Why haven't we done it? All right, we've been through a lot in this conversation, and to bring it to a close, I want to build a summary page for you. I saw some of you already got your cameras out already. We can take a snapshot. Something for you to keep close on Monday when you go back to work. First, while parts of design might contain steps in a process, design itself is not a process. Design's purpose is to create clarity. To create clarity, we move back and forth between 3 modes: orient, frame, and act. To orient is to fall in love with the ambition, embrace systems thinking, and imagine bold worlds. To frame is to champion problems, ensure balance of design and business language, and to use frames to unlock a bigger ambition. While act is to embrace a bias to action, seek proof of change, and momentum over milestones. From here, we'll know we're successful when we see signs of clarity: unified understanding, focus, momentum, tangible outcomes, and confidence. So, sorry. So from here, we know that we're successful when we see these signs of confidence. So all the way back to the map at the start. Mull drew a world that leaders could act on, and I want to encourage you to do the same. See the bold ambition in front of you, orient to what is true, frame what matters, and act in small steps that build momentum. This is how you make meaningful progress, and it's how you use design to create clarity. Thank you.